Hi guys, my name is Trey Ford. I'm here just to do a brief introduction. This talk is not the Ollie B talk. This is a talk by Alex Hutton and Allison Miller, ushering in the post-GRC world, applied threat modeling. Alex Hutton is the principal research and intelligence. He's a principal researcher and part of the intelligence team, risk modeling over at Verizon Business. He's one of the authors of the Data Breach Incident Response Report, which, by the way, was released today. He's one of the custodians of the Verus framework. He blogs at New School and the Verizon Security blog. Allison Miller is a group manager for risk and fraud at PayPal. She works with network graphing and identity data to detect fraud patterns. Previously, she served as director of product risk at Visa International, specialized in e-commerce, prepaid, and cross-border remittance solutions, as well as various gigs and other InfoSec ops. They are both founding members of the Society of Information Risk Analysts. So, take it back, guys.
Can you hear me? Is this on? All right, great. Well, thanks for coming. As Trey said, my name's Alex. I'll be talking for the first part, and then Allison's going to take over and teach us a bunch of stuff. And then we'll wrap it up with some practical application and a couple of examples. There are a lot of people who talk these days about what is risk management, what is information security. And if you listen to a lot of them, they'll offer to you that information security and what we see, it's a lot of pseudoscience. And I actually like to think that we're more of what Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher, said called a protoscience. And if you look at how he defines a protoscience, I think it'll speak to a lot of similarities. If you've ever tried to create metrics, if you've ever tried to get data, if you've ever tried to manage by evidence, right? That's exactly what we start to see. So if we are going to study risk management, if we are going to study information security, what do we need to study? This is actually deceptively simple in my mind. Jack Jones, who I worked with for a while, he used to be a security officer at Nationwide. He always defined it as 4 landscapes. You have a threat landscape, and you need information and understanding about the change in information for the threat landscape. You have a controls landscape, you have an asset landscape, and you have an impact landscape. As he continued to teach me about these things, one of the things that I noticed is that actually a Venn diagram better represents it, that represents actually what we want to study. And the reason for that is if you think about where the circles overlap, we actually have synthesis of information. So one of the things that I've been noticing, and you guys who are actually in enterprise risk management programs talk about this, and let me know how you feel. But it's a disconnect between GRC, what the risk analyst actually is doing, and operational security. And recently I ran a quick poll. It was just a bunch of people on Twitter, a bunch of people on the Security Metrics mailing list, a bunch of folks who read the New School of Information Security blog, and so forth. And it's completely unscientific. I just wanted to see what I got back. But it did show that there was it really asked, okay, so how often does your GRC analyst actually interact with operational security? And for the most part, I got back not at all, never. It just doesn't happen. And so when I've thought about GRC, I actually see it as a construct that's been fabricated over the past few years, and I really find some real problems with this as a construct. And I'm going to talk about them backwards. And the first one I want to talk about is compliance. Okay? I see any compliance standard that's built as a model. Why? If you think about PCI DSS, you think about a standard like ISO 27001, all this is a bunch of people in a group, in a room saying, well, we think this is how you should defend a network. These are the things that we think you should be doing in order to resist attackers. If that's so, and Allison disagrees with me, and that's okay, if that's so, I offer to you that that's actually a model. And if it is a model, then what E.T. James said in his book it basically is that models are really hypotheses, and they're subject to scientific method, and they should be disproven. They should be falsified. So to me, compliance without metrics, that's just a bunch of guys in the room saying, do this. But if you start adding models and metrics to compliance things, now you can actually say, here's a standard. And based on what we've collected around incidents, what we've collected around successes for this standard, well, this standard's bogus, or this piece of the standard's bogus, or this standard needs to be, we need to audit on this standard in total. So what about risk? And this is where I really have a problem with a lot of GRC suites and constructs. Risk, as I've seen it, basically is what Andrew Jaquith calls a hamster wheel of pain. It is find issue, right? Figure out how bad the issue is, fix the issue, and then hope the next time you do some discovery method, you don't see the issue ever again, right? And the problem I have with this approach is severalfold. First, anybody who's done an actual enterprise risk assessment and you get back like 500 pages of information, how are you supposed to synthesize that? How do you check? And this is exactly like a vulnerability assessment, right? Okay, so great, I've got 500 mediums. What do I do with that? Right? How do I know? In risk, it's even worse. I've got a low likelihood and a high impact, or medium likelihood and a medium impact, right? And that's just qualitative models. When we get into quantitative models, half the models, if you look out there, are using ordinal scales. And then they're using multiplication on ordinal scales. And if anybody here knows anything about math, multiplying ordinal scales kind of breaks the way the universe works. You can't do it. So that's kind of the first problem that I find. The second problem is this. When you're actually out there collecting risk issues, this particular threat specifically might attack this particular asset in this particular way, and you're collecting bunches of these, you're really making point predictions. And if anybody has ever studied complex adaptive systems, one of the tenets, and that's difficult because it's a new science and there are plenty of other definitions and so forth out there, but one of the basic tenets of it is that point possibilities are extremely difficult, if not impossible. If the only thing you can do is identify patterns within those. In other words, those who are the founders of that particular field would look at what we're doing in information security and figure, are you guys nuts? Really? I like this. This is something else Jack came up with, and it's a new definition for risk management. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, especially if you think about it from a CISO standpoint. Really, it's taking exposure to risk, and it's taking your capability to manage risk, what you do with your resources that the data owners have given you, and you're matching that to the tolerance of the data owners. And it should be noted that as security professionals, a lot of the times, we think that means lower risk, lower risk, lower risk, lower risk. Well, what about like DSW, who just went, yeah, okay, great, we're out of PCI compliance, have a nice time, we're going to take the fines, right? That was actually the data owners saying, what they're telling me to do, that does not match my tolerance for risk. So I'm not going to be bothered with it right now because it's expensive for me economically. Taking that definition into consideration, let's talk about governance. Governance, in a sense, can be defined as I've heard it defined as that which we're supposed to do, right? So I have a problem with that in that if you're in management theory, and governance really is an expression of how you should manage a business, right? If you're in business management theory, this is W. Edwards Deming, who, for those of you who don't recognize the face, and for those of you who don't know, he basically changed the world with quality management. One of the reasons why the Japanese automobile makers overtook the US and so forth, right? Because he went and basically studied what was going on in production lines and said, okay, if you want quality, if you want the right production, if you want optimized production, you're going to measure. And you're going to measure and you're going to apply the results back, right? So basically that's where Demings gave us this quote. When you talk about governance, how I interpret that is governance, again, without metrics, without models, is basically superstition. It's a bunch of guys getting in a room saying, well, you know, this feels like how we should govern a security program. Right? Governance, however, with metrics and models, my assertion is a capability to manage risk. And let me explain that this way. Here's Dirty Harry. Everybody kind of know, seen Dirty Harry movie? One of my favorites, right? So here's Dirty Harry, and you're staring down that barrel. Now let's say Dirty Harry represents a couple things. First off, does he follow policies and procedures? No. Is he effective? Yeah. And I realize I'm pointing to television and movies and these, but I think the logic is decent here. Here's Barney Fife, right? Was he a stickler for policies and procedures? If you ever watched, yes. Was he very effective? Not without Andy Griffith behind him. That was the whole freaking crux of the comedy relationship. And these guys, if you gave these guys a procedure to follow, like baking a cake, the next thing you know, you've got a rubber boot and nitrous oxide in the cake. The point being, governance, unless you're managing how you're doing, well, it's basically superstition, and you don't know if you're doing a good job or not. Now, think about it this way. If he's your IDS guy, if he's an operational security analyst, do you have more or less risk with him at the helm? Anyone? Less? Anybody want to say less? Anybody want to say more risk? I got Adam, and I knew that. All right. Now, comparatively, if we replace him, he takes off and leaves because he can't take hanging with the chief security officer anymore, and we replace him with Don Knotts. Now, compared to Dirty Harry, do we have more or less risk? What if we decide, you know what, we're overpaying Don, we're going to get rid of him, and we're going to hire these three guys? Do we have more or less risk? The point is that your capabilities impact your risk. Governance with metrics and models is therefore simply a statement of your capability to manage risk and is a component of risk management. Back to that earlier definition, right? You add to that something that I read on the flight out, which was a study from Carnegie Mellon. It's not in the paper that you'll find on the website, but if you ping me on Twitter or email me or go to a blog, I can point it to you. But it's a Carnegie Mellon study where they actually surveyed the board of directors for Fortune 1000 companies. Anybody want to guess what percentage of those Fortune 1000 companies' board of directors was really interested in information security and IT governance? Anybody want to guess? Go ahead. 8%? It was 5? It was 0. It was 0. In contrast, 56% of them were really interested in the risk management programs, the operational risk management programs, under which IT would fall under. So as I look at GRC, and I hope that I've made a convincing argument here, we can't have any more disconnect. Operations actually influences what we do. So with that said, I do want to turn it over to Allison.
Okay, so might help if I give you a little bit of background on what it is that I do. I actually work in risk and fraud, and so for me, risk management is not very theoretical at all. It's very real in the sense that when we make mistakes, we find out because we lose money. And when it comes to management, just in general, one of the things they dislike is losing money, and it's something they're very attuned to. So that could explain why many executives are quite interested in risk management with the actual emphasis on management. One of the points that Alex and I disagree on is whether compliance programs actually provide a model. I think that they don't, actually, because models are things that I use to understand how my system is supposed to work. And so compliance programs compliance seems like it's a good idea to do, as opposed to necessarily things that are going to help me make my system more predictable and be able to systematically lower risk. So one of the things that is how we can use models, in fact, to close the gap between assessment, which is what I feel like a lot of governance and are you going to help me here? Hello? Okay, all right, cool. Okay, closing the gap between assessment and defense. So, what does that mean? There's three major places where I see risk and threat modeling as being useful to a risk management program. Design, management, and operations. And what I mean here when I say design is not just design of the control system,